This is episode number 70, featuring one of America's hot up-and-coming artists, Jennifer McChristian. Welcome to the PleinAir podcast from PleinAir magazine. I'm your host, Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of PleinAir magazine. In the PleinAir podcast, we dig into the world of outdoor painting, often called plein air painting. For those who don't know, it's a French term essentially meaning outdoors or open air. French say plein, others say plain, but however you say it, plein air or plein air, it's a huge movement of artists around the world going outdoors to paint. I call it the new golf. This podcast is brought to you by the African Painting Safari. It's one of my trips, Publisher's Invitational trips. This is a bucket list trip to a place you probably wouldn't go on your own. It's a chance to go on an African safari, live in beautiful accommodations. It's beautiful sightseeing, unbelievable scenery around Africa, and painting. Beautiful painting in places like Victoria Falls, one of the great wonders of the world, plus safari to see animals. This is going to be an amazing trip. And it's a small group, just 50 people. You can bring your spouse or your partner. It's going to be a blast. Our trips are done well. You're going to really appreciate them. We have some seats left, but we got to get that paperwork done soon because the trip is coming up this September. So if you want to learn more, go to AfricanPaintingSafari.com. Yeah, there's even payment plans available. It's my desire to see more people fall in love with plein air painting, and you can help by sharing this podcast with your friends on social or email, and you can subscribe on iTunes. And if you have feedback, send me a note, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. The interview is also brought to you by the Plein Air Convention right around the corner in Santa Fe. April 16th through 20th, we have 83 top artists so far to teach you and to work with you in the field. You can come as you are. You don't have to be intimidated, whether you're a brand new painter, whether you've never painted, whether you're experienced. Everybody's there to have a good time. We are family. I think there's a song, right? We are. Anyway, last year we had close to 1,000 people, and a lot of people showed up who had never painted before and started their first painting at the Plein Air Convention. What a great place to learn, because there are lots of people there to help you and work with you, embrace you. You don't have to be embarrassed because we've all started, right? Anybody can come, and we're going to have a great time. Anyway, people leave transformed because you got 5 days of teaching and then painting every day. It's quite a sight, historic to see 1,000 or more painters painting together in one place. It's pretty amazing. So you can learn more at pleinairconvention.com. Hopefully by the time you hear this, there are still seats left. Well, let's get right to our interview. I've been wanting to interview Jennifer McChristian. She is an absolutely amazing painter. I really love the energy in her paintings. I've been watching her. She's really coming on strong. She's been out there for a while. She's selling out a lot of workshops and doing really great. So here's our interview with Jennifer McChristian. Well, I am absolutely thrilled. One of the artists I'm very excited about right now is Jennifer McChristian. Jennifer's work is fresh and energetic, and I see it everywhere, and everybody's raving about it. Jennifer, welcome to the Plein Air podcast.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for inviting me.
So how long you been doing this plein air painting thing?
I would say probably about maybe a good 15 years, I guess, or maybe 12. Yeah.
And how did it all begin? Let's kind of start with the beginnings of interest in art, and then how you ended up going outdoors.
Okay. Well, let's see. I did go to Otis Parsons in Los Angeles, and I studied illustration and design, and then I did a couple of stints and jobs in the industry, like the T-shirt industry, did designs there, worked in animation for a while, and deep down inside, I always wanted to just pursue a painting career. And then I finally kind of just jumped the ship and started painting full-time after I met my husband, Ben. And then I was really interested in doing plein air. I mean, I enjoy being in nature already, and so I just started looking at magazines and collecting pictures and clips and stuff like that. And then I took a couple of classes too, just to get me warmed up again for painting, because I'd been out of the painting moved for so long. So then I actually went and painted PleinAir, and I was just hooked since. It was just something about being outdoors. It was exhilarating. I felt just a sense of exhilaration and calm and peace, and I was just excited to be back painting again. And yeah.
And who
so
did
after
you
that, it was just.
who did you study with when you said you took a couple classes?
Oh, I studied with Carl Dempool, fantastic teacher, wonderful artist, and I also took a class. My very first PleinAir class was with Robert Blue. He's passed away now, God bless his soul. Very wonderful man, and he was doing more illustration at the time, but he got into painting, and he was teaching a PleinAir class. And he was really a good mentor and very encouraging, and he always took us to the same spot over and over again. And what I liked about his theory about, it's not pretty much like having to go seek the most beautiful location or sunset. It's just trying to find something that you like in the area that you're in, regardless of where you're at. So I thought that was kind of a cool exercise to do. A lot of the other students didn't like that or complain, but I always managed to find something, even though it was like the same place over and over again. But he was very encouraging, and yeah.
Well, I've often thought that a great way to teach would be to take a class and set them down in the middle of an alley where there's just nothing but dumpsters and say, okay, now we're going to learn how to make these things beautiful, because if you can make them beautiful, you certainly can make a landscape beautiful.
Totally, and I've been in those locations many a times.
Well, so what do you think is behind the fact that you're getting so popular and so many people are aware of you? Has this been deliberate? Is this something that just kind of happened?
I think mainly it's probably has something to do with the subject matter that I choose. It might be not as conventional as most landscape subject matter. Maybe it's the style, which kind of is distinctive of the way I paint. I'm not sure, but those are the two things that come up for me.
Well, since this isn't television, and for the people who are listening, maybe you could articulate a little bit about what the subject matter is that you're typically painting, and maybe you could even articulate a little bit about that style. I know that's a tough, tall order.
Yeah, because I know a lot of students in my workshops ask me about that. Because it's like, how do you develop style, and when do you get to a point where you're happy with the method that you're using, or it is a tricky question to answer, because style just develops with time and mileage, and it never ends, because I'm at the point where I always want to evolve, and sometimes I'm at a point where I'm not happy with a certain way I'm working, and I'm thinking, well, maybe I could change things up a little bit. So it's always changing and evolving, and you don't want to get to a place where you're stuck and just stuck. So you want to just keep growing, which is the beauty of painting, because you're just always growing. You never get to like a finished point. You're pretty much like a work in progress all the time. But as far as subject matter, I kind of tend to look for scenes that it's usually something that has to be like a scene that stops me in my tracks, or grabs my attention and makes me ponder as to why I would want to paint that. And I'm just more typically drawn to things that are more like that would be mundane to most people, or unusual, or quirky, or unconventional. But I mean, I also do like to do a beautiful rural landscape and a glorious sunset as well. But it's sometimes it's not even so much the physical attributes of the scene. It could be more of the like the design, or how shadows and shapes create interesting and dynamic patterns. That is like really visual or emotional. Or sometimes it's just a matter of like wanting to like explore texture in a tree, or a particular stone, or an old building, like an old dilapidated building or something. So it's yeah, but typically it has it's something that kind of grabs me and gets me like, salivating, like I need to paint that. So
So what do you paint first? Do you paint the thing that excites you first and then complete the rest of the painting, or do you just go through a methodical process of creating the whole of a painting?
Well, first, it's more about like looking for a scene, and I always take a little bit of time if I'm going out plein air painting. I'll take a little bit of time to, with my viewfinder, and I'll just walk around wherever I decide to go painting. And I'll walk around with my viewfinder and try out different compositions with my viewfinder. And then when I see something I like, and it's interesting because sometimes I may start with something, and then if the light changes, then it doesn't excite me anymore, and either I'll scrape it or start something new if I have the time. But usually that's my process. I'll go, walk around, maybe do some small little thumbnail sketches, and then, once I found what I like, then I just go through the process of beginning my painting.
And what is your process? Do you have a particular process that you try to follow, or do you just kind of randomly take it on?
Well, I do. I'm very meticulous when it comes to habits and rituals with stuff like that, regardless of whether it's plein air painting or studio painting. So typically I figure out where I'm going, and then I always give myself like no more than 20 minutes to, if I know exactly where I'm going, then I'll just go there and start painting. But if it's a new place that I want to explore, I'll give myself about maybe a maximum of like 20 minutes, because it's so annoying to have to drive around and, look, and then also just the whole process of looking and not making a decision can tire you out. So then once you actually decide after like an hour of looking, you're tired. So I kind of give myself a limit of 20 minutes, and usually I'll find something before 20 minutes, or after 20 minutes I just say, okay, I'm stopping here and I'm going to find something and just paint. So it just works. Sometimes I'll find something right away, sometimes I won't. But regardless, I have to just paint, and I'm already there. I got there, and I have all my stuff, so I'm going to paint even if I'm not that excited about it, because it's always a learning experience anyways. So once I do that, then of course I have my whole way of like setting up. I always make sure to do a value study, which I talk a lot about in my workshops, and I'll sketch, and I always set up my paints the exact same way each time. I make a point to constantly clean my palette and clean my brushes, so I don't get too, so my colors don't get too muddy. Let's see. Yeah, I think also being organized and having like a certain method or rituals to doing this helps you to just focus more on the creative aspect. Because if sometimes if you're disorganized and you're thinking about like, oh, where did I leave my brush? Where's my white paint? Then you're focusing all your energy on, other stuff rather than painting. Mm-hmm. So I'm very, very meticulous when it comes to like, even in my workshops, my students are always like looking at me and say, oh, you're like a surgeon. I'm always like tidying my stuff, and everything's all neat. All my palette knives are arranged in a nice, neat, orderly fashion. But that's just the way I work. Not everybody's like that. Some people feel more comfortable working in chaos and mess, and they do quite well. But it just depends on the individual. But for me, I find that if I'm very organized and tidy, then I can focus on my painting and not worry about where all my stuff is.
Now, is that a nature of your personality? Do you tend to be kind of a very organized person in general anyway?
Oh, yes. Or more so like a control freak, but I've been like that my whole life, just even growing up. I had my socks always arranged with color, and just my pencils were like neatly aligned in school. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I use it to my advantage, but yeah, I'm a neat freak, and it definitely goes with my personality.
That's interesting though, because your painting does not look like you're a neat freak. Your painting has these. I
know. I get that a lot. They say, "How are you so like anal?" And then your paintings look so free and loose. But again, it goes back to it's like a control thing. If I can control every other aspect on the outside of painting and have everything orderly, then I can free myself and relax and just have more fun with the actual painting itself.
So when you first started, were you one of these people that had a little bitty brush and you're holding it like a pencil and just kind of doing a lot of meticulous, or did you start out being bold and abstract?
I was always very expressive in my work. Like even when I took a class with Robert Blue, my PleinAirs were a lot bigger and more splashier, and the red undertone was like straight cadmium red. Now it's just more of a salmon color. So, but I've always been that way. It's always been more expressive, and I'm always like pushing myself to be a little bit more abstract and having a little bit more looser brush strokes. But I mean, of course, in college, we had to do all sorts of like assignments that required like being meticulous and doing reproductions and doing really tight work. That was all part of the technical aspect of it, which was good training for me. But I think I've always been a little bit more expressive and loose in my work.
And in terms of college, did they teach you plein air painting?
No, they didn't. It was more. It was a lot of figurative painting, still life painting. We did cast, sculpting. We even had a photography class back when it was using a regular camera. We developed our own film in the darkroom. But it was mostly like indoors, like just figurative and still life and stuff like that.
Uh-huh. How did you discover plein air?
I think it was just like I mentioned earlier. I always loved being out in nature as a kid. I was always outside playing. I used to go to summer camp all the time. So for one, just being in nature is I have an affinity for that, and I love being outdoors. So you mix that with painting, and it's just like the best of both worlds. And also just I was inspired by just other painters and looking at magazines and stuff, and I think it also was a nice way to divert my energy from studio painting, just kind of like a refreshing change from being in a studio.
Okay, interesting. And now tell me what plein air painting means to you in terms of spiritual, physical, emotional aspects.
As far as like spiritual, to me, plein air painting is like just as is drawing and any form of painting or making art. It's like a form of meditation, or I guess I would call it mental yoga. And when I'm painting, it's like a Zen-like experience, like where the time just stops, and I'm like really focused, because I wouldn't say I have ADD, but I have similar aspects of somebody with ADD, so it helps me to like be focused. Also it just it helps me to be focused and present. And also being out in nature is also very therapeutic and beneficial. It helps me to reconnect with nature, and nowadays it's even more important because we're so dependent and reliant on technology. So it's always good to kind of like just get out there and be like in the real world, I guess. So yeah, it's just really something that like a mental yoga, and it's helps me to kind of just shut down the voices in my head, which I'm sure a lot of other artists can relate to. And once you get into the process of painting, then everything just gets quiet, and you're focused, and you're like concentrating. And it's much like just playing music or dancing. You just get into a space where you're just kind of like present, completely present.
And are you relatively deliberate in the way you paint, or are you kind of I'm trying to figure out how to ask this question. Your paintings look like they're slashed together, like it's all this energy and fast movement. But Richard Schmid looks that way, but he's very slow and deliberate about the way he paints. So which are you?
Well, I would probably say I'm very similar to Richard, where I am. It doesn't look like I am, but I am very slow and deliberate, and there is a thought process to it. And also just mileage. I always stress to my students a lot of drawing wherever we can, just a lot of mileage. The more you paint, I guess the more comfortable you get with putting shapes together faster, blending colors faster, so then you can actually be a little bit more free to do something a little bit more loose, and not, you don't want to go in there kind of just haphazardly and do it sloppy. You want to have a thought process behind it. So I would say, yeah, definitely meticulous.
Do you try to envision the finished painting before you start?
Yes and no, because sometimes when I do, it never really comes out the way I want it to. So I try to detach myself from that and just kind of go with the process. Because, we all have expectations, and some artists are a little bit more hard on themselves than others. I know I'm very hard on myself. I'm getting a little bit better with that now. But if I do something that's a complete scraper, if it didn't come out the way I kind of imagined it, it's like, okay, no big deal. Whereas in the past, I would get really furious. But now it's just like, hey, it's just part of the process and learning and growing. So sometimes I do, but now it's more of a general kind of idea of what I want, rather than the exact replica of I'm going to go exactly for this. So I'm kind of just a little bit more relaxed with myself with the outcome. And usually if I don't have any expectations, then that's usually when something magical happens or a painting, comes out that I really like.
Happy accidents.
Yes, yeah, that's a good word for it.
So how long have you been teaching, and what are some of the core ways that you approach teaching?
I've been teaching for about, I believe, 8 years, or maybe longer. 2007.
Okay.
So, yeah, since 2007. And it's interesting, the story behind how I got into teaching is a good friend of mine who was taking a live drawing workshop with me in Los Feliz was telling me, hey, you should, start teaching, and you're at a level where you can do it, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, absolutely not. I don't feel comfortable. I always thought because I always say that I'm shy, but people say, oh, you don't seem like a shy person. But I consider myself shy. And she said, well, just start off with a small group or just with friends and just kind of share what you know, share your process, just like you're talking with friends and you're just out there painting. And so I tried that, and I felt comfortable with it. And then the groups gradually got a little bit bigger and bigger. And then once I got comfortable with that, then I started advertising my workshops, and I started teaching and stuff. And my very first workshop was really nervous, but I still get nervous, but not as much as I used to. But as far as my process, I always start off with value. That's the first topic and subject that I cover because it's so important. And then on the second day, I get into color mixing, color theory. And then on the third day, then I kind of get more into design and paint application and brush work and stuff like that. Because if I approach them with all this stuff all at once, it's very overwhelming, and it's hard to teach plein air painting in 5 days. There's so much to it. So I try to break it down in manageable sequences to where it's bite-sized sections of information that they can actually grasp. And I keep my exercises very simple, and I always have them paint small because they're not so invested in finishing a large painting, and they don't get frustrated oh, I didn't finish my painting. And I always encourage them to do small little failures, basically if you don't like it, wipe it out, throw it out, put another canvas and do it over again. That way they learn more that way, and they also enjoy the workshop more. So just more in sections leading up to and towards the end of the workshop, then I allow them a little bit more flexibility and freedom to kind of do their own thing and kind of apply all that they've learned in the class towards the last couple of days.
Cool. And what are you finding are the common threads between students that they really need help with?
Oh, you mean like a beginner or?
Well, beginner is probably not it's probably more the people who have been painting a while that are making a lot of common mistakes that you find. Oftentimes we hear that it's values, but what about you? Is it same thing?
The thing that comes up, yes, definitely. Yeah, I would say values, which is why I really put a lot of importance into this topic, and also edge work. lost and found edges, and a lot of times people come in and they say, I want to be able to do all the various different edges that you do because my work is too sharp everywhere. It's like too hard-edged everywhere. So that's one thing. Also, composition is a big one that comes up, regardless of the level of the artist. That's like a biggie that comes up. And again, that goes hand in hand with like doing a thumbnail sketch and value, because that helps you to determine what kind of composition you're going to have, which is why I always implement that information at the beginning of the workshop.
I'm going to put you on the spot in terms of
talking
about those two things specifically, composition and edges. What can you share verbally? I know it's hard to do that because you can't show anybody, but what are some theories in composition and edges that might be helpful for the people listening here that might not know how to handle that?
Okay, well, first let's start off with composition. I think with composition, it's to me, that's the backbone or the skeleton of the painting. And design is interesting because it's something that you don't really see, but you see it. I don't know if that makes sense, which is why the value studies are important, because once you break down all your big shapes with the four values, you can kind of see almost like a abstract pattern of your scene, which will help, to determine whether it's going to be a pleasing design or not. Because it's like no matter how beautiful your brushstrokes are or how glorious your colors are, if you don't have a good design behind that, it's just going to fall apart. I always tell my students over and over again, it's much like building a house. You have to have like a very strong foundation, and all that stuff, the foundation, all the ugly stuff in the 2x4 gets covered up. But if it's a solid foundation, you're not going to see it, but you will see it. I don't know if that makes sense, but it'll just hold well. So this is why I always work on values. And doing sketches, doing like different little various thumbnail sketches, maybe like 3 or 4, maybe 5 versions of the scene, like low horizon, high horizon, just to kind of play around and see what catches their eye and what works. Mm-hmm. And as far as edges, I always like playing with edges because it's just so much fun. You can do so much, and typically, a hard edge is just anywhere where you have like a very, very sharp separation of light or color, like a contrast, red and green, or the light is light and the dark is dark. And I always put like my sharpest edges where I'm going to have the eye focused on, like the focal point, and then typically the peripheral area of the painting is going to be a little bit more loose. Because it's much like, if you're looking at someone directly, you're going to be more in focus, and everything else is kind of like hazy. So that's what determines, the fact that it's been painted live, because that's how the human eye sees. So I try to, even when I'm doing studio paintings, I try to keep that in mind if I'm using photographic reference, to just play around with those theories. So. And then, of course, there's always the physical attributes of edges. Like if there's like a tree bush or whatever, like a rose bush, it's going to be a little bit softer edge than a hard edge building that's in sunlight against a dark background. So I always emphasize that, where you see things that are hazy, then push that aspect of it and make it a softer edge or a disappearing edge or something.
You studied with Carl Dempwolf, and you studied with Robert Blue. What are the most important things you think you learned from those two painters?
I think from Carl, he's such a great guy. It was mostly about edges. He really taught me about edges, and more so also value. And Robert Blue is more about like design and composition, because like I mentioned before, he would take us to the same place, and so that forced me to really see or find something within my environment that I could use as a painting. Mm-hmm. And then another instructor that I really enjoyed was Steve Houston, and he was he did mostly figurative stuff. It was an indoor class, and I was working with a figure and still lives, and he definitely helped me with values, because he had us work with not like 4, but like 2 values. So it really forces you to like, okay, I'm just working with the lights. Like everything in the shadows is going to be this one value, and everything in the light's going to be one value. So that really helped me to be sensitive to seeing the subtle shifts in value, and helped me to really learn how to edit them.
Okay, makes sense. And what about Carl?
Carl, he helped me more with edges. I remember one time he came by, and I was doing a little painting. It was like, I think it was a mountaintop, and then it was like the horizon of the mountain, and then the sky in the back. And he came and he just like did this brushy work that blended in with this, the mountain with the sky. And I thought, oh, bingo, there it is. So I think he really, because I like his style, it's very loose and painterly. So he helped me with just being a little bit more free with my edges and not so, so tight and have like too sharp of edges everywhere around the painting. Mm-hmm. And also with color too. He has a wonderful sense of color, and so that was very helpful for me.
Yeah, his color is very clean. And you mentioned you're cleaning your palette and cleaning your brushes constantly, and that's how you get clean color, I assume.
Oh, yeah. If I'm mixing colors on my palette, I have a glass palette, so it's easier to clean because I use like a little paint scraper from Home Depot. But if I'm mixing a color, like first I'll assess the color, like, okay, that's going to be like an olive green. I'll go ahead and mix my color with my knife. Rarely do I use my brush. Once in a while I'll use my brush if I'm like, in the moment and I'm painting something and I need to put a color on real quick. But if I'm painting like, okay, I'm going to do this large area, I always mix with my palette knife, and I make a large enough pile. I try not to skimp too much, because once you get that right color and you run out, then you're like screwed, because then it's like, oh, well, what did I use to make that color? So I always stress to my students, like, don't skimp on your paints. Use as much as you can, because you can always save them. I mean, I get a little paint saver thing that I bring with me, and I just put it in the little tray, and I reuse the same colors the next day whenever I go out painting next.
And do you put anything in the colors to keep them from drying out?
No. Well, actually, no. When I get to the studio, I'll just put it in the fridge. I have this little studio fridge and a little freezer section. And I just put it in there, and it stays pretty fresh for up to like almost a week.
Yeah, that's great. Good.
Yeah. But yeah, always mixing with my palette knife is the key to keeping your colors fresh and clean. And also, if I'm doing a new area, I will either use a clean brush or make sure that the brush I'm using is clean of the previous color that I used. I just dip it in my solvent, make sure to wipe it out really good with a paper towel. And so that really also helps to keep your colors nice and clean.
Jennifer, do you ever have days when you just don't feel like going out and painting, and do you just let that take over and not go painting, or do you force yourself somehow? How do you deal with those moments?
Oh, that happens frequently. That's a good question. If I'm feeling kind of unmotivated or uninspired, I will either try a different medium. It doesn't necessarily have to be going out to PleinAir. I could just do it at the studio. But trying a different medium to change things up, reading some inspirational books, watching a DVD on painting, going to the museum to look at different paintings and stuff, also taking workshops, some artists you admire, and, of course, drawing. Drawing is always a great way to just get out of any kind of block. And as far as trying a different palette even, just like pushing yourself to try a different palette just to get that your brain kind of going a little bit if you're used to working the same way all the time. So that's one. Also, travel is great because you get to see things, different things, different cultures, just sensory overload of like just different things that you can experience from a different perspective. I call it like filling the well. I just get the creative juices flowing, and yeah.
How much of the time are you spending outdoors versus in studio?
Oh, that's a good question. Actually, because I forgot to mention that earlier. You know how I said how I time myself when I go and look for a particular subject matter to paint. I do time myself when I'm doing a plein air. I didn't do that before, but now I do it more so I can expedite for my demos and my classes, but also because I want to get to a point where I don't get too stuck on something or where something slows me down. I want to be able to keep that proficiency going. So, and also if I take too long, then I get kind of stuck or more concerned with detail and stuff, and that's not the direction I want to go. So typically I'll time myself like about an hour and a half or something. And I paint relatively small, like, between, I think my largest size is 8 by 10. I've painted larger before in the past, but I like 8 by 10 is a nice, comfortable size for me. Sometimes I'll do smaller. So typically like about an hour and a half, and I have the little timer go off. Sometimes I'll just keep painting if I'm really enjoying it or if the light stays consistent, like cloudy weather.
Well, Jennifer, this has been a pleasure. I think you and I could go on and on and on and on because you've got so much energy. But thank you so much for being on the program today. This has been, I think you're going to inspire a lot of people. You certainly inspired me. What is the time limit that you set when you're doing a plein air piece?
About like an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours if the light is consistent, doesn't change much, like an overcast day, then I can allow myself a little bit more time to play around with detail. But an hour and a half to 2 hours is a good set time for a plein air, the size that I use, typically like 8 by 10 or smaller.
Right. Okay, terrific. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you on, and we hope one day we'll get you maybe to the plein air convention.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I had a lot of fun.
Thanks again to Jennifer McChristian. She's a fabulous artist. Jennifer, we hope to see a lot more of you around. Today's podcast was sponsored by the Plein Air Convention in Santa Fe, coming up right around the corner. There still might be seats depending on when you're listening to this. Go to PleinAirConvention.com. Santa Fe is going to be a great place. Podcast is also sponsored by our African Painting Safari. It's a bucket list trip. Remember, it's limited and you got to get your seats booked because there's paperwork to be done. Check it out. There are payment plans available. AfricanPaintingSafari.com. And if you haven't seen my new blog on Sunday mornings, it's called Sunday Coffee. You can find it at coffeewitheric.com. A lot of stuff to remember, huh? Well, the plein air movement continues to be red hot, which is why Plein Air Magazine remains the leading selling art magazine nationwide at Barnes & Noble. Thank you so much for that. Drop by, pick one up, get a bi-monthly subscription of your own for about half of what you'd pay on the newsstand at PleinAirMagazine.com. Well, this is always fun. Let's do it again sometime, like next week. We'll see you then. My name is Eric Rhodes, and I'm the publisher and founder of Plein Air Magazine. Remember, it's a big world out there. Go paint. We'll see you. Bye-bye.